Hello everyone and welcome to Eclectic Book Diary. Today's video I am wrapping up everything that I read in the month of April. Now, coming out of a reading slump for at least 4 months before that, I would say I picked up the rhythm in March, but definitely the main detachment from the reading slump happened in April. However, for November, December 2021 and also January and February of 2022, I was mainly in a reading slump. I have managed to read a few books during those 4 months, but I was definitely in a reading slump. I wasn't really in a very reading mood overall, and I didn't read as much as my heart usually desires. So definitely last month, the month of April, was a breakout from that. I managed to read 10 books, which I will be wrapping up today. However, I'm not gonna go in the order of reading. I would be presenting first the gigantic books that I've read, going from that to less heavier books, and then finally, I will finish this video by mentioning the mangas that I have managed to read as well. So let's begin. The first one I have managed to read last month was The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, and it is the first installment of the Stormlight Archive, which is within the Cosmere universe. Before I read this book, I have heard so much about Brandon Sanderson and I was intrigued. However, I feel like I kept delaying my actions and I kind of was going back and forth between like, which book should I start with? Should I start with Mistborn or one of the standalones books within the Cosmere universe? Should I read something from the Stormlight Archive, like the first book of the Stormlight Archive? And I finally settled on actually starting with the Stormlight Archive. As far as the synopsis goes for The Way of Kings, the story happens in the realm of Roshar. Basically, centuries ago, the Knights Radiant has fallen, and the only thing remained from them is their shard blades and their shard blades, which is basically kind of a mystical swords and armor that can transform regular men into powerful, nearly indestructible warriors. So to keep it short, shard blades are really a big deal in this world. In this book, we have 3 main POVs. We have Kaladin, Bright Lord Dalinar, and a young woman named Shallan. I believe this book focuses more on Kaladin's point of view. However, the other POVs are also important for this book, but I would say leans a little bit more towards Kaladin's perspective. As I said, this book is a start of an epic fantasy series called the Stormlight Archive, and there's supposed to be 10 books in total for this series. We already have 4, and the 5th one is supposed to be out by the end of 2023. I'm planning on reading these 4 books this year and possibly rereading them before the 5th one comes out next year. Now, for my own experience with this book, I found this book to be highly interesting, very enticing, and overall I had great time with it. The story in general is very intriguing with its political plot lines and with an extremely intricate magic system. I really felt drawn into the story overall with its character workings in general and its interesting pacing, which sometimes tend to fluctuate a little bit. However, overall, it keeps kind of an increasing trajectory line where things seem to explode right at the end. I would say the last 200 to 300 pages, because yeah, it has over 1,000 pages, so just keep that in mind. As far as the writing style goes, I've heard 2 different perspectives over this. Some people really enjoy the simplicity of the writing style, and other people didn't really care for it. I see it as a highly efficient, simple writing style, but mind you, it doesn't really take away from the complexity of the story overall. That's how I personally perceived it. I personally don't really connect that much with highly beautified writing styles in fantasy stories. I prefer it to be less heavy on that side and more focused on like providing me as a reader of the information necessary for the overall development of the story, and not really getting lost in the sentiment of the writing style, which can be very appealing sometimes. However, with fantasy stories, especially a story as, I would say, as intricate as this one, I prefer things to be within this writing style. I found it to be very easy to follow and not really that complicated, which interacts well with the overall complicated nature of the details that this story could provide you. So overall, I really enjoyed this one, and I can't wait to continue with the next one, which I will be doing definitely this month, the month of May. Now, the second book, really heavy book that I have finished, was a book from another huge series, and that is The Dragon Reborn from the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. Now, the Wheel of Time series has 14, and if you include the prequel in general, that will make it 15 books, and they are written by Robert Jordan. However, they are finished by Brandon Sanderson. The last few books, because unfortunately Robert Jordan died before he was capable to finishing his series, which is very unfortunate. However, I'm still interested to see how Brandon Sanderson would take Robert Jordan's vision and how he would deliver the last few books if I managed to actually read the full series. So overall, I can't talk that much about the book itself because this is the third book in the series. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tell you the lore overall for the Wheel of Time in general, and then I tell you what I thought about the first two books and also about the one that I read in April. Only very vaguely and hopefully in a condensed way, because I don't want to be sitting here forever. So for the Wheel of Time story in general, the set of the story is kind of on an unnamed world. It is inspired or some form of our own Earth, but it's not really Earth, and it has even more undefined timeline, which gives a very distant past vibe with a very futuristic one at the same time. Before our main story begins, right at the dawn of time, a deity called the Creator forged the universe and the Wheel of Time, which spins the pattern of ages using the lives of men and women as its threads. The wheel has 7 spokes, each represent an age, and it's rotated by the one power which flows from something called the true source. The power is divided into 2 halves, the male half and the female half, or as known as Saidin and Saidar. These 2 powers are opposite in nature, but they also work in unison to drive the wheel in general. And humans who have this power are called channelers, also known as Aes Sedai. In the first book, which is The Eye of the World, we follow the journey of Rand, Mat, Perrin, Nynaeve, and Egwene, who happen to live in a small village called the Two Rivers, when an Aes Sedai named Moraine comes to this village and tries to convince them of the danger that is lurking and awaiting for them, and that they should leave with her just to get a chance to survive. And obviously the story picks up from there. For me, I was so intimidated of starting the first book. However, once I started, I actually ended up enjoying the book way more than I thought I would, and I was pleasantly surprised because I've never actually read anything that is classical beside, I would say, The Hobbit. I know that The Wheel of Time is considered like a bridge between classical fantasy and modern fantasy, but however, it still has a bit more classical fantasy vibe. It's definitely very heavy on the chosen one trope. However, so far, after reading 3 books, I think it is done more appropriately than I thought it would be done, and I'm not that mad about it. I enjoyed the first one and I wanted to continue, so I picked up the second one, but unfortunately, right when I picked up the second one, my reading slump began, and it wasn't because of the book, it just correlated with the fact that I started The Great Hunt, which is the second book in the Wheel of Time series. So because of that, I can't really give you a very true form of my opinion over it because I feel it's clouded by the fact that I was in a reading slump, so I can't be very effective with giving my opinion on this one. However, it was good enough for me to keep on going to the third one, which is The Dragon Reborn, the one that we were supposed to talk about for today's video. Now, as I said, I would not go into the details of like a synopsis or anything for this specific book. I wouldn't say it's my favorite book from the 3 that I read or from fantasy books in general, but I'm still forming my opinion over the series overall, and I do believe that this book kind of gave me a vibe that if I continue with the series, this could possibly be a really good series, something that I could say in the future that I loved reading, not only enjoyed in general, but actually loved. I felt personally that for this specific book, a lot of characters had really great development moments. I wouldn't say all of them, but for the most part, some characters have had really interesting development, and some of them got to shine a little bit more than others, but overall I found it to be, as I said, enjoyable. So I'm hoping that the next one will be the one that seals the deal on whether I would continue with the full-on series and just like commit to the overall 15 books, or just makes me realize that maybe this one is not for me. I know it could be interesting if I go just book by book, and if I feel like I don't want to continue at whichever point I could, but technically in reality, if I reach a certain point, even if I didn't feel very connected or very interested to continue, I would still continue just out of pure curiosity, and also out of like, I already invested so much time in reading, like there's no going back. So I don't want to be into that category. I generally want to figure out earlier on that I am really happy to continue, and in this way, even if I reach a book that is not as likable as the other books, I would manage to continue knowing that things would pick up later on, hopefully at least. And now let's move on to the other books that I've read. And the third one would be The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. Now this one is obviously less heavier, also shorter in general. I have done a full-on reading vlog for this one. So if you want to see my full-on experience with this book, I will link it in the cards. However, it's also a fantasy book with kind of a mysterious plot line that has been described as a quote-unquote dark academia. I feel personally that it's a bit overhyped, or it was a bit overhyped on social media. And since I have the older editions of the physical copies of this book, and I also got a chance to listen to the audiobook, the main thing that I have noticed from, or that I've taken from this whole experience with this book, is that the audiobook and the original edition of the physical books don't really match each other. There is a lot of changes involved in the audiobook mostly, which, by the way, these changes don't necessarily change the overall story. However, they do add on a bit of details to some of the characters, and they do elevate slightly the writing style. In the end, it was a light, fun read. However, wasn't necessarily my favorite, and it's not really that heavy on my mind. I think I easily could imagine other books being prioritized over this one or whichever sequel that would come afterwards. Now, moving on to a set of books that I managed to read also last month. I managed to read 5 books within one series. I'm talking about the Wayward Children by Shannon Maguire series. I read book 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Honestly, they are kind of more of a series of novellas, so they are a lot shorter than books that I tend to gravitate towards. However, it was such a fun and pleasurable experience to just go through these books. The first one is Every Heart a Doorway. The second one is Down Among the Sticks and Bones. The third one, In an Absent Dream. The fourth one, Beneath the Sugar Sky. And the fifth one and the last one that I read was Come Tumbling Down. Now, there is still 2 more books in this series so far. I would like, obviously, to also continue reading them, hopefully this month as well. We follow the story of Eleanor West and her home for the wayward children, where children that once upon a time stumbled upon a door and went into another world, and then for some reason or another this world has kicked them out, or they had to get out of that world and they returned to quote-unquote the real life, and they are not really adjusting with the real life. And so Eleanor West, she kind of made this home for these children to come and live there and hopefully try to help them in some way or the other. The overall trajectory of the story is very whimsical. Sometimes it can get a little bit darker, sometimes it can get really dark and kind of gothic-y. Other times it feels like more lighthearted. It has, in general, the charm that middle grade, or what I call the charm that middle grade stories provide. However, I believe it's a YA fantasy story. It provides kind of a deeper discussion over so many important questions that we might face in our journey from, I would say, childhood to adulthood, or even as adults in general, not necessarily just in that transition period. The way that Shannon Maguire writes things, it's very beautiful. Like, this is one of the cases where I actually like to have a little bit more of flair into the writing style. It just gives you that atmosphere that keeps pulling you into the stories again and again and again. And it's just like, I really had so much fun reading them, and I really felt so deeply moved by a lot of the things that happened in these stories. These books in general, they aren't necessarily meant to be read in a chronological order. You can pick and choose like any book and you will be able to move through the book easily enough. But I personally found that the first one kind of sets the whole vibe of the story. So I personally felt that it's the best to read the first one, and then you can continue from there. It is inevitable that something would be spoiled by the other books. I mentioned this in my last video. Basically, I'm repeating myself right now. However, I think it's important to note that if you want to read out of order, it's more efficient if you read the first one and just set yourself in general into this world, and then you can go out of order if that's what you feel like. I personally read the first and the second one after each other, back to back, and then I read the fourth one, and then I came back and read the third third one, and I read then the fifth one. You'll still have a little bit of a spoiled moments because some stories affect other stories, and sometimes we get like prequels or prequel vibe where we go and know the backstories of some characters, and this inevitably will have a sense of spoilery vibe overall, but in general it doesn't really affect the experience these books provide. I love them so much, and I'm really excited to continue, but also really sad that there are only 2 books, and I hope that Shannon Maguire could keep on releasing such wonderful books in general. And now we reach the manga section, which includes the last couple of books that I have read for April, and I have read technically 6 volumes of the regular volumes of Dragon Ball manga, which are written by Akira Toriyama. I have the German editions. Each 3 regular volumes are within 1 massive volume, so actually they are right here. These are the volumes. They are technically 3 in 1. So yeah, I have read 2 of these massive volumes. The story follows our main character named Son Goku. This boy is a very quirky, very weird little fella. He has a tail as well, like a monkey tail, and he goes from being alone almost to start to meet up with different people, and he generates friends along the way where they actually trying to collect Dragon Balls, and if you collect them all you can summon the dragon, which will grant you a wish, and yeah, they are on a journey of doing that. The story overall is kind of comedy filled, funny, quirky vibe in general, and it does have a little bit of a fighting scenes. However, as far as I understood, as the story progresses and in like other installments, I think things will be focused more on the fighting sequence and less on the comedy vibe, which I do not particularly think that would be my thing. I actually enjoyed these so much because of how weird and funny they can be. I have a little bit of a problem of how they represent some cultures and also how they represent some characters. However, it's a very old manga as well, and I mentioned this before, it's a product of its time, and I'm gonna try not to judge it too hard because I still enjoy the story overall, or the funny moments overall. So it has its problems, definitely. It might have been even a reason for me to quit reading it if it wasn't that old. I believe in like regular cases I might even like technically just DNF it because of how problematic some of the things are. However, I feel like because I decided to just not go too harsh on it, I am managing to look over the problematic things that it contained, but I have to see how long I can like keep up with not really being bothered by these problematic things, how long I could just go through it and brush it off as, you know, this is an old thing, an old written manga, and I might change my mind at some point and be like, nope, I don't think this is worth continuing. But for now, I don't mind going through certain moments so I can get the other side of the things that are actually enjoyable about the story. Am I making any sense? Hopefully. And yeah, those were the books that I have read for the month of April. Since I picked up the momentum of reading, I am gonna try to keep up that for future months, but I would not be focusing so much on like I have to read 10 books or so. That's not my goal. I just want to be able to continue enjoying reading books, and whether that is like 2 books, 3 books, or 10 books, or what have you, it doesn't really matter as long as I am actually enjoying my time and not feeling like I am in an actual reading slump. That's all I care about right now. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you find this type of content interesting, feel free to subscribe, and I hope you're having a wonderful day or evening whenever you're watching this, and I also hope you will join me on the next one. Until then, take care. Bye bye.